Classic house music, much like classic hip hop, is a genre that starts with a simple set of ingredients that gradually evolves in new directions over time. The origin of the genre coincides with the death in big quotations of disco, and the genre's sharp decline in favor of rock. However, like the Legends of the Phoenix, house music emerges from the ashes. Samples are taken from disco records and were subsequently transformed into early house hits like Black Box's Right on Time. As they were combined with the soon-to-be main element of house, electric drums. This mix of disco and pumping floor-to-floor electronic drums, often supplied by new machines like the Roland TR-909, became so popular that the genre took off and hasn't stopped since. As the genre expanded, so too did the technique of its various producers, with the electric drums now having been established as the heartbeat of the sound. Producers became eventually more experimental with what could be placed on top of a now iconic low end. As a result, the house genre has an interesting role for samples used. For example, acid house, Euro house, Chicago house, deep house, and so on. The sampling conventions would often change depending on region. Yet despite all of these differences, one element remained consistent throughout the evolutionary process. The drums, and the use of the floor-to-floor kick pattern. This is the most consistent element among 90% of house music. What goes on top of the drums is subservient to the beat, whether a sample, a synth, vocals, or another element altogether. Because the drums are not a sample themselves, this leads to an interesting fork in the road for house music producers, where some tracks can completely forgo the sampling process in favor of the use of just synths entirely. At one point along the evolution of house, sampling became less of a requirement and more of an option, an intentional creative choice. For those producers who did opt into the sampling process, sources expanded beyond disco over time, bending new sounds to the beat. This proved to be an extremely adaptable framework for creating house music using samples. Almost anything will work as a sample choice in house, provided it is arranged in service of the dominating drums. The sampled elements are often altered using processes like sidechaining and EQ to further emphasize that kick drum, which would remain the main focus. There are upsides and downsides to this approach. After all, it stands to reason that if almost any musical idea works under the kick, house is arguably the easiest genre to sample in. The idea of most samples acting in service of the kick, an often unmoving or unchanging element, may start to give the impression that sampling for house is easy, or lazy, or repetitive. While this argument might hold some weight, it also leads to a surprisingly strong counter-argument. Because almost any musical idea works, house producers get a massive amount of room to experiment with sound design, specifically for the element that occupies the top layer. This is where the greats show their genius in sound design and sampling technique. Take for example Daft Punk's Face to Face. According to Daft Punk collaborator Todd Edwards, Face to Face contains up to 70 samples and chops so small a community of dedicated fans have struggled to locate them all decades later. By all means, a composition like this isn't practical or traditional by any means, but because of the drums gluing everything together, it works. Another prime selection is Justice's Phantom, which assembles similarly short chops from one 8-second sample source. These samples are then rearranged in length, pitch, and start duration to achieve 29 different workable chops to arrange with. The effort and technical skill showed by sampling producers at the very top of house production is often second to none when it comes to creativity and versatility in sample manipulation. Because of the drums underneath, not only are these experimental sounds made practical for looping and composition, they work like a charm.